I remember that summer vividly. The summer my father, Daniel, and my stepmother, Rebecca, rented an old house by the Rio Bravo in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, for their honeymoon. Despite the locals' constant warnings about the place being haunted by La Llorona, they brushed it off, thinking it was just a silly ghost story meant to scare kids like me. I never had a mother growing up. She died giving birth to me, leaving a void my father couldn't fill. Overwhelmed with work, he eventually remarried, hoping Rebecca could care for me as her own. But things didn't turn out the way he expected. From the moment Rebecca entered our lives, I became her outlet for anger. She blamed me for everything, setting me up to be scolded by my father. Sometimes, I even overheard her telling someone she wished I were gone so she could live peacefully with my dad and the baby she was carrying. The house they rented by the river had a strange, unsettling aura. The water was dark, crows circled overhead, their cries echoing through the air, and low, rumbling noises came from across the river. Mist hovered above the surface, giving the place an eerie, chilling feel. Shortly after we moved in, my father left to pick up some supplies, leaving me alone with Rebecca. I was sitting in my room when Rebecca came in. She smiled and told me there were fascinating things across the river and urged me to check them out. At first, I hesitated, but her insistence wore me down. Looking back now, I realize it was all a trap. I ran across the small wooden bridge leading into the forest. The further I went, the darker and more ominous everything became. Leaves rustled, crows screeched, and I could hear the slithering of snakes in the trees. With each step, I felt the weight of her deception. I started crying, calling out for my dad, but only the echoes of my own voice answered. I don't remember how I found my way back, but when I did, my father had been out searching for me all night. I said nothing about what had happened. He hugged me tightly, relieved, while Rebecca glared at me with fury. Her plan had failed. In the forest, I had met a woman dressed in white. Her face was sorrowful, but her voice was soothing. She guided me back home and, before leaving, handed me a bracelet. She said she had a daughter who was lonely and hoped I would visit her next time. Somehow, her words gave me a strange sense of comfort. That night, Rebecca caught me talking to someone in my room. She stormed in but found no one. I pretended to be reading, and the woman in white had vanished before she arrived. Every night after that, the woman would return, telling me stories until I fell asleep. Her kindness filled the emptiness I had always felt, making me trust her completely. One day, my father and Rebecca were invited to a spa. I told them I wasn't feeling well and needed to stay home to finish my homework. Rebecca supported my excuse, and my father agreed. Once they left, I retrieved the bracelet and crossed the bridge again. This time, the woman in white stood waiting in the distance, a pleased look on her face. The bracelet led me deeper into the forest than before. The stench of decay filled the air, guiding me to a cave. Inside, I saw rotting carcasses and human bones. At the center sat a little girl with a disfigured face, crying. She told me she needed my heart to heal her face. Terrified, I stumbled back and ran, but the girl chased me. Just when I thought I was doomed, an old man appeared out of nowhere. He yanked the bracelet off my wrist and flung it far away. He explained that the bracelet had absorbed my scent, allowing the girl to find me. He also revealed that the woman in white was La Llorona, seeking to collect the hearts of children to resurrect her own lost ones. I cried as I ran, not stopping until I saw my father. He had heard my cries and found me just in time. He hugged me tightly, promising never to leave me alone again. That night, I heard La Llorona's wailing by the river. But I no longer trusted her. Clutching a crucifix to my chest, I locked my door and stayed inside. The next morning, Rebecca was nowhere to be found. I found my father burying something in a hole behind the house. When I looked closer, I realized it was Rebecca. Her cries the night before had lured her to the river, and her unborn child had become another of La Llorona's victims. My father and I left the house that same day. But I know La Llorona is still there, waiting by the river, seeking out more children to lure into her trap. The story I'm about to tell begins with despair. Despair born from poverty, where each passing day felt like an endless, grueling march toward nothingness. Mike, my husband, and I once dreamed of a brighter future. But the crushing weight of hunger and hardship ground those dreams into dust. My husband, a kind man, no doubt, worked tirelessly at the rice processing factory, his hands rough and calloused, his face etched with exhaustion. Yet, all that effort amounted to nothing. It was never enough to provide a better life for either of us. When Henry entered my life, he felt like a savior, sent to deliver me from the misery of my existence. Wealthy, refined, and radiating happiness, he was everything Mike was not. Leaving Mike wasn't easy, at least not at first. But the promise of a luxurious life blinded me. I walked away, hoping to rewrite my story into something beautiful, to finally have the life I believed I deserved. Mike came looking for me. I should have known how much he loved me. He rushed to Henry's estate that day, disheveled and frantic, begging me to come home. He promised he would work harder, that everything would change, and I would finally be happy. But I spat bitter words in return. "Get those filthy hands away from me." Cruel words, but they were all I could muster. I had chosen a different life. Mike left, shoulders slumped, and I thought that was the end for us. But it wasn't. A few days later, Henry told me Mike had been fired. "He went somewhere without permission," Henry said casually. I knew what somewhere meant: me. Henry had ensured Mike's dismissal to keep him away from me. "He won't bother you anymore." I didn't think much of it until weeks later when rumors began to spread. They said Mike was now living in a high-end apartment, dressed in fine clothes. I couldn't understand it. How could someone who had hit rock bottom rise so quickly? Not long after, Mike came to see me again. I barely recognized him. The man standing before me exuded confidence, dressed impeccably, but something was wrong. His eyes carried a darkness I had never seen before. He said he had become wealthy and could now give me the life I had always wanted. I hesitated, but when he presented me with a dazzling pearl necklace, I believed him. I left the life I had traded everything for and returned to him. Yet, even as I moved into his luxurious apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then Mike told me everything. It was a mirror, he said. An old, decrepit thing he found by the river that night when he had planned to end his life. He remembered his grandmother's tales of Bloody Mary, a spirit within the mirror who could grant wishes for a price, a piece of one's soul. Desperate, he had tried it. "I just wanted to prove I could be more," he swore. "I traded a piece of my soul." I thought it was absurd, but I didn't question it further and instead enjoyed the newfound luxury. However, as time went on, I noticed Mike growing weaker, paler. I ignored it, lost in my own happiness. One night, I convinced Mike to summon her again. If she can grant wishes, I reasoned, why not wish for more? I wanted a diamond ring, a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. Mike hesitated but couldn't refuse me. He summoned Bloody Mary once more. This time, after the wish was made, something unthinkable happened. Mike's shadow began to fade. He told me he would never summon her again. He wanted to stay alive to love me. The next day, I noticed the mirror was gone from its display case. I asked Mike about it, and he said he had destroyed it and thrown it away. "I just want to be happy with you now," he said. But as soon as he turned away, the mirror reappeared, intact, in its original spot. Seeing this, Mike summoned her again, this time pleading, "I don't want anything more. Please, just let me go." But it was futile. Once someone used the mirror, it would never leave until it had taken their entire soul. And as long as it remained, ambition would keep driving them back to it. Years passed, and we still couldn't have children despite trying every treatment available. Unbeknownst to me, Mike summoned Bloody Mary again, this time wishing for a child. That night, he was overjoyed, promising me, "This time, it'll work." And it did. I became pregnant. Our daughter was born, but as her life began, Mike's life seemed to unravel. He grew frail and vacant, his mind fixated on the mirror in the corner of our room. One day I realized the mirror had vanished entirely. That's when it hit me. Mike had given the last of his soul to ensure our happiness. But he didn't know. I had already begun to regret everything. Without him, this happiness felt hollow. I am broken, consumed by guilt. I miss him so much. Mike, I'm so sorry. I truly regret it all.